Colonel Hayes, Admiral Wilson's voice carried clearly above the post-ceremony chatter. I didn't expect to see you here today. The title echoed in the space around us. Turning heads, my parents, standing just feet away beside my brother Jack in his new SEAL uniform, froze in confusion. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stood rigid, disbelief etching across his face. Colonel, he finally spoke, the words sounding foreign on his tongue when directed at me. There must be some mistake. For 12 years, my family believed I was a military dropout working at an insurance company. They never knew I was actually a high-ranking Air Force Special Operations officer, leading classified missions that saved countless lives. Now, in one unexpected moment, my carefully maintained cover was crumbling before my eyes. If you've ever been misjudged by the people who should believe in you most, drop a like on this video and subscribe to hear how I navigated this life-changing revelation and rebuilt relationships that years of necessary deception had damaged. My name is Samantha Hayes, 35, and I'm standing at the back of my brother's Navy SEAL ceremony in civilian clothes, invisible to my family who thinks I'm a military dropout. The irony, I'm a colonel in Air Force Special Operations for national security reasons. I've kept my career secret for years. As I scan the crowd, I notice my brother Jack's commanding general looking in my direction, his eyes widening in recognition. Before I tell you what happened next, let me explain where it all began. Growing up in San Diego as the daughter of retired Navy Captain Thomas Hayes meant military excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. Our home was adorned with naval memorabilia, and dinner conversations revolved around maritime strategy and military history. My father's booming voice would fill our dining room with tales of his deployments, his eyes gleaming with pride as my younger brother Jack absorbed every word. I listened too, equally fascinated, but somehow my enthusiasm was never quite received the same way. Samantha has a sharp mind, my father would tell his Navy buddies who visited, but lacks the discipline for service. This assessment stung particularly because I'd spent my entire childhood dreaming of following in his footsteps. I ran before school each morning, studied naval tactics from his bookshelves, and applied to the Naval Academy with perfect grades and test scores. When I was accepted, it was the proudest day of my life. My father actually hugged me something rare enough to make the moment feel monumental. Don't waste this opportunity, he said, his voice gruff with what I hoped was emotion. The academy was everything I'd hoped for, challenging and fulfilling. I excelled in strategy courses and physical training, graduating in the top percentile for both. What my family never knew was that during my third year, I was quietly approached by intelligence officers who had noticed my aptitude in several key areas. They offered me a position in a classified program that required immediate transition and absolute secrecy. The program demanded I create a cover story. The officers suggested the simplest explanation that I washed out of the academy. It would be believable enough many talented candidates didn't make it through and would draw minimal attention. I agreed, believing my family would eventually learn the truth when my assignment allowed. I couldn't have been more wrong. I just don't understand how you could throw it all away, my mother Eleanor said during my first visit home after the dropout. Her disappointment manifested in tight lips and averted eyes. Your father pulled strings to get you considered. I didn't ask him to, I replied quietly, the classified nature of my new position sealing my lips from sharing anything meaningful. My father was worse. He didn't rage or lecture. He simply stopped talking about me. When relatives asked about his children, he'd light up discussing Jack's accomplishments at the academy, where he was following the traditional path I'd supposedly abandoned, and then change the subject when my name arose. Thanksgiving dinners became exercises in endurance. Jack's been selected for advanced tactical training, my father would announce, slicing the turkey with precision. Top of his class. We're so proud, my mother would add, her hand resting on Jack's shoulder while her eyes slid past me. It's comforting when your children find their purpose, my cousin Melanie once said directly across the table. So, Sam, are you still working that administrative job at the insurance company? This was the cover story. I'd maintained a boring corporate position that discouraged further questions. Yes, I answered, swallowing both the lie and my pride. Still there, good benefits, I guess. She replied with a thin smile that conveyed volumes about her assessment of my life choices. Meanwhile, my actual career was advancing at an extraordinary pace. I couldn't tell them about the night operations in countries officially untouched by American forces. I couldn't mention the intelligence I'd gathered that had saved countless lives, or the commendations accumulating in a secure facility, rather than on my wall. I couldn't explain the months of silence when I was unreachable, because I was operating deep undercover. Each success in my classified world seemed to parallel a disappointment in my family's eyes. When I was promoted to major, my parents were discussing how Jack had been selected for an elite training program. When I received a silver star in a private ceremony, my mother was lamenting to her friends about her daughter, who just didn't apply herself. Jack himself wasn't unkind, he simply followed our parents' lead, growing increasingly distant as our supposed life paths diverged. Occasionally, he'd call with news of his accomplishments, always ending with an awkward, "So, how's the office job?" I'd murmur congratulations and offer vague updates about my fictional corporate life, hating every second of the deception. Years passed this way. With the divide growing wider, I developed a thick skin about my family's perception, focusing instead on my missions and the difference I was making. But deep down, the pain of being the family disappointment never fully subsided. Every achievement in my secret life was shadowed by the knowledge that the people who should be proudest didn't even know. My transition from Naval Academy student to Air Force Special Operations was abrupt and intense. While my family believed I was licking my wounds and settling for civilian mediocrity, I was actually undergoing some of the most rigorous training the military offers. The program that recruited me specialized in intelligence gathering and analysis with direct tactical applications, a rare combination that suited my particular skills. The training facility was located in an unmarked compound in Virginia, where days began at 4:00 a.m. and often ended after midnight. Physical conditioning was merely the foundation. The real work involved learning to process and analyze intelligence in real-time crisis situations, often while experiencing extreme physical stress or sleep deprivation. "Hayes, your mind works differently," my instructor, Major Lawrence, noted after I solved a particularly complex intelligence simulation. "You see patterns where others see chaos." This aptitude accelerated my progress through the program. While most trainees required 18 months to complete the course, I finished in 11. My first assignment came immediately after a low-profile intelligence gathering operation in Eastern Europe, where Russian influence was creating concerning ripple effects. Colonel Diana Patterson became my mentor during this period, a pioneering woman in special operations. She recognized something in me that reminded her of herself. "The system isn't built for us," she told me frankly during a debriefing. "But that's precisely why we succeed in it. We approach problems from angles others don't consider." Under her guidance, I learned to navigate not just the operational challenges, but also the unique difficulties of being a woman in this elite space. She taught me to use others' underestimation as an advantage, to speak with quiet authority rather than volume, and to build networks of trust that transcended the usual military hierarchies. By my fourth year, I had been promoted twice and led my own intelligence team in operations spanning 3 continents. My specialty became extracting critical information in environments where traditional intelligence assets couldn't operate. One particular mission in Syria resulted in intelligence that prevented a major terrorist attack on European soil. The classified commendation cited my exceptional judgment under extreme pressure and innovative tactical approach. Yet each time I received recognition within my classified world, the contrast with my family life became more painful. I attended award ceremonies alone, watching other officers embrace their proud families. I celebrated promotions with colleagues who knew only pieces of my story, never the full picture, and I continued to maintain my cover as an unremarkable corporate drone during increasingly infrequent family visits. "Congratulations on your promotion to team lead in customer service," my mother said during one phone call, clearly making an effort to show interest in what she believed was my career. I had actually just been promoted to lieutenant colonel after a successful counterterrorism operation in Somalia. "Thanks, Mom," I replied, hating the deception. "It's just a small step up." The operational security requirements of my position meant maintaining absolute secrecy. Even as I rose to command larger teams and more sensitive missions, my cover story remained in place. Only a handful of high-ranking officers knew my complete service record, while most who worked with me knew only the portions relevant to our joint operations. By the time I reached the rank of colonel at age 34, an accomplishment that placed me among the youngest to achieve this rank, I had led operations in over a dozen countries and saved countless lives through intelligence work. My specialty in counterterrorism had expanded to include disrupting human trafficking networks and preventing hostile cyber operations against critical infrastructure. What made my rapid rise even more remarkable was achieving it while facing the additional challenges women in special operations encounter. I navigated skepticism from some traditional military circles, adapted to equipment and tactical approaches designed for male physiology, and developed leadership styles that commanded respect in environments where female leaders were still relatively rare. Through it all, I carried the strange burden of my family's disappointment. Each time I returned from a classified deployment to attend a holiday gathering or family event, I stepped back into the role of Sam the underachiever. I became adept at deflecting questions about my work with vague corporate jargon and redirecting conversations to Jack's increasingly impressive naval career. The weight of these dual identities grew heavier with each passing year. There were moments when the deception felt unbearable, like when my father made a passing comment about people who couldn't cut it in real service, or when distant relatives asked patronizing questions about when I might find direction in my life. But my commitment to national security and the missions I led always silenced the impulse to reveal the truth. The work was too important, the stakes too high. If maintaining my family's disappointment was the price for operational security, I would continue to pay it regardless of the personal cost. Last Thanksgiving marked a particular low point in my relationship with my family. I just returned from coordinating a joint intelligence operation with NATO forces, 36 sleepless hours of tension that ultimately prevented a significant security breach instead of recovery time. I went straight to my parents' house, exchanging tactical gear for civilian clothes and the hypervigilance of command for the different tension of family dinner. My father stood at the head of the table, crystal glass raised in a toast to Jack. He announced, his voice carrying the captain's authority that never quite left him, whose selection for the Elite SEAL training program continues our family's tradition of excellence in service. Everyone raised their glasses. My mother beamed with pride, her eyes glistening. We couldn't be prouder, she added. I joined the toast. Sincerely, Jack's accomplishment was significant. And despite our strained relationship, I respected his dedication. But as glasses clinked and congratulations flowed, my mother leaned toward her sister and whispered just loudly enough for me to hear, "At least one of our children is making us proud." The comment sliced through me despite years of developing thick skin. I excused myself to the kitchen, ostensibly to help with dessert, but really to compose myself. My cousin Melanie followed, cornering me by the refrigerator. "So, still pushing papers at that insurance company?" she asked, sipping her wine with an air of superiority. Melanie had recently been promoted at her law firm and never missed an opportunity to highlight the contrast in our careers. "Something like that," I replied, focusing on arranging pie slices rather than meeting her gaze. "You know, my firm has an opening in our administrative department," she offered with faux generosity. "Probably pays better than what you're making. I could put in a word." I thanked her politely, while imagining how she might react if she knew I'd just briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff the previous week. The dinner conversation shifted to a recent military operation that had made national news, an operation I had actually helped coordinate from the intelligence side. I sat silently as my father and uncle analyzed what little information had been released to the public, both confidently incorrect about how the mission had unfolded. If they'd approached from the eastern perimeter instead, my father declared with authority, they could have avoided that initial resistance. I took a long sip of water, knowing the eastern perimeter had been deliberately avoided due to intelligence I'd personally verified about hidden surveillance systems. The urge to correct him burned in my throat, but I swallowed it with my water. After dinner, Jack announced his engagement to his girlfriend, Allison, a naval medical officer he'd met during his training. The family erupted in celebration. Champagne appeared, toasts multiplied, and my mother immediately began discussing wedding plans. In the midst of this joyful chaos, my secure phone vibrated with the pattern that indicated highest priority. I slipped away to the guest bedroom to check the message immediate deployment orders. A situation had developed that required my specific expertise. With extraction scheduled in 3 hours, I returned to the celebration, pulling Jack aside to offer genuine congratulations, and explained that a work emergency required me to leave immediately. His face fell in disappointment tinged with familiar judgment. "Seriously, Sam, it's my engagement celebration. What kind of insurance emergency happens on Thanksgiving night?" "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it completely but unable to explain further. I wouldn't leave if it wasn't absolutely necessary. My parents reacted with the resigned disappointment I'd grown accustomed to. "Of course Samantha has to leave," my mother said to the relatives, not bothering to lower her voice. Her priorities have always been different. I caught my father's head shake as I gathered my coat, the subtle gesture of disapproval that had followed me since childhood. As I drove away, the family continued celebrating without me while I prepared mentally for the classified operation ahead. The mission kept me deployed through Christmas and into the new year. When I finally returned, I learned that my absence had become a focal point of family discussion. Jack's engagement party had been held without me, and my failure to attend had been interpreted as further evidence of my disregard for family. "Your brother was hurt," my mother informed me during a tense phone call. "After everything he's accomplished, the least you could do is show up for his important moments." What she couldn't know was that during his engagement party, I had been leading a critical intelligence operation that resulted in the rescue of kidnapped aid workers. The mission earned me another commendation, one that would remain in a classified file rather than on my mantle. The growing divide between my professional success and personal failure created an increasingly unbearable tension. Each family interaction became more strained, each deception more painful. As Jack's seal ceremony approached, I found myself at a breaking point, torn between my duty to national security and my crumbling relationship with my family. The day of Jack's seal ceremony dawned clear and bright, perfect Southern California weather that seemed to mock my inner turmoil. I deliberated for weeks about whether to attend, knowing my presence would be scrutinized by a family increasingly frustrated with what they perceived as my indifference to Jack's achievements. My decision to go wasn't simple. I requested a rare day of leave from my duties, arranged secure transport, and carefully selected civilian clothes that would allow me to blend in while still maintaining appropriate military bearing, a habit too ingrained to break even in this context. The Naval Special Warfare Command facility gleamed in the morning sun as I approached. I instinctively cataloged security positions and protocols, my trained eyes noticing details most civilians would miss. This awareness reminded me how far I was from the person my family believed me to be. I arrived deliberately late, slipping into the back row as families claimed seats near the front. My parents occupied prominent positions in the family section, my father wearing his dress uniform with the pride of a naval captain whose son was following his distinguished path. My mother beside him, elegant in a navy blue dress, her posture reflecting the military precision she'd absorbed through decades of marriage to my father. The ceremony proceeded with the characteristic discipline and tradition of naval special warfare. Each element, from the presentation of colors to the precise movements of the honor guard, followed protocols I knew intimately from my own classified ceremonies. The difference was that today's event was public, celebrated openly with proud families and commemorative programs, unlike the clandestine recognition of my own achievements. As the ceremony progressed, I found myself analyzing the security perimeter out of professional habit, while simultaneously absorbing the significance of Jack's accomplishment. Becoming a SEAL represented years of grueling training and exceptional dedication, a fact I appreciated perhaps more fully than anyone else in my family could. Midway through the ceremony, I noticed a familiar face on the platform, Rear Admiral Wilson, who had commanded joint operations where my intelligence team had provided critical support. He was scheduled to deliver remarks as part of the leadership cadre. Seeing him triggered an immediate internal alert. Admiral Wilson was one of the few high-ranking officers who knew my complete service record and true rank. I shifted slightly in my seat, angling myself to become less visible from the stage. The movement was subtle, the kind of adjustment intelligence officers make instinctively to avoid recognition when necessary. For a moment, I believed I had successfully minimized my presence. Then came Jack's moment of recognition. He stood tall as his accomplishments were read, his face composed in the disciplined expression of a warrior receiving honors. Despite our complicated relationship, pride swelled in my chest. Whatever else had transpired between us, my brother had earned this moment through genuine merit and determination. As applause followed Jack's recognition, I allowed myself to relax marginally, a mistake. In retrospect, my slight movement caught Admiral Wilson's eye during his scan of the audience. I watched his expression change as recognition dawned, first confusion, then certainty, then an unmistakable reaction to finding a highly decorated Air Force Special Operations colonel sitting anonymously in civilian clothes at a Navy SEAL ceremony. Our eyes locked momentarily. In that brief exchange, I conveyed a silent request for discretion that military personnel of our rank and experience understand implicitly. The Admiral gave an almost imperceptible nod, and I believed the moment had passed without incident. The ceremony continued with the remaining recognitions and formal remarks. I began calculating my exit strategy, planning to congratulate Jack briefly before departing to avoid extended family interaction. But as the formal portion concluded and families began moving toward their graduating SEALs, I noticed Admiral Wilson conversing with another officer while gesturing subtly in my direction. My internal alarm sharpened. The second officer, Commander Brooks, had also worked with my team during a joint counterterrorism operation the previous year. Now both men were looking in my direction with a particular expression of military leadership, preparing to acknowledge a fellow officer. I began moving toward the exit, hoping to evade the approaching confrontation, but the crowd's movement blocked my path. As families surged forward to congratulate their graduates, I found myself inadvertently pushed toward the area where Jack stood with my parents, rather than toward the exit I'd been targeting, in that moment of navigational confusion. Admiral Wilson reached me, his commanding presence parting the crowd around us. I straightened instinctively, muscle memory responding to the presence of a superior officer despite my civilian clothes. What happened next would permanently alter my family's perception and change the course of our relationships forever. Colonel Hayes. Admiral Wilson's voice carried clearly above the post-ceremony chatter. I didn't expect to see you here today. The title echoed in the space around us, turning heads, my parents, standing just feet away beside Jack, froze in confusion. Admiral Wilson, I responded automatically, assuming the formal posture ingrained through years of military service. It's good to see you, sir. Last time was that joint operation in the Gulf, wasn't it? He continued, either unaware of or unconcerned about my family's proximity. Your intelligence was impeccable, as always, saved a lot of lives. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Jack's expression transformed from celebration to bewilderment. My father stood rigid, his brow furrowed in deepening confusion. Colonel, my father finally spoke, the words sounding foreign on his tongue when directed at me. There must be some mistake. Admiral Wilson turned, noticing my family for the first time. Recognition flashed across his face as he took in my father's decorated Navy uniform. Captain Hayes, he acknowledged with respect, before turning back to me with raised eyebrows. They don't know, before I could respond. Commander Brooks approached, extending his hand. Colonel Hayes, your team's work on the Antalya operation was remarkable. We've implemented your extraction protocols across 3 divisions now. The reality of my position was materializing around us like a photograph developing in solution, becoming clearer with each passing second. My carefully maintained cover, the story of professional mediocrity I'd cultivated for years, was dissolving in real time. Samantha, my mother's voice trembled with confusion. What are they talking about? Admiral Wilson assessed the situation with the quick comprehension of a seasoned commander. Captain Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, he addressed my parents directly. Your daughter is one of our most valuable assets in special operations. Her work in intelligence and counterterrorism has been extraordinary. That's not possible, my father stated flatly. Samantha left the Naval Academy. She works in insurance. Air Force, not Navy, Admiral Wilson corrected, and at a rank that reflects exceptional service. The insurance work would be her cover story, fairly standard in her division. Jack stepped forward, his new sealed trident gleaming on his uniform. Sam, is this true? The moment of decision had arrived without warning or preparation. Years of secrecy pressed against the sudden exposure, creating a disorienting pressure, but as I looked at my family's confused faces, I recognized that continuing the deception was no longer an option. Yes, I confirmed simply. It's true. You're actually a colonel in the Air Force. My father's expression cycled through disbelief, confusion, and the beginning glimmers of reassessment. Special Operations Command, Intelligence Division, I specified, the words feeling strange after years of careful avoidance. I was recruited from the academy directly into a classified program. The dropout story was my cover. Other officers who recognized me had begun to drift over, creating an impromptu gathering that made the revelation increasingly public. A major from Joint Special Operations nodded respectfully in my direction. Colonel Hayes's analysis changed our entire approach in the Mogadishu intervention. My mother looked physically unsteady. All this time, when we thought, I couldn't tell you, I said quietly. Most of my work is classified at the highest levels. The cover story was a requirement, not a choice. Jack's expression had transformed completely, shifting from confusion to a growing understanding that only another military professional could fully grasp. That's why you missed my engagement party, coordinating an extraction of exposed assets in Eastern Europe. I confirmed. It couldn't wait, and I couldn't explain. My father, ever the Navy man, had regained his composure and was processing the information with military precision. Was your security clearance level higher than I can specify in this setting? I answered, the response itself confirming more than the words contained. Around us, the crowd continued to celebrate, largely oblivious to the family drama unfolding in our small circle. But within that circle, years of misperception were crumbling under the weight of revealed truth. Admiral Wilson, sensing the personal nature of the moment, prepared to withdraw. Captain Hayes, you should be proud. Your daughter's service record is exceptional. The details are classified, but the value is beyond question. He turned to me with a respectful nod. Colonel, I'll see you at next month's Joint Operations briefing. As he departed, The protective barrier between my two worlds, the accomplished military officer and the family disappointment, had been irrevocably breached. Standing before my family in civilian clothes, but now recognized as Colonel Hayes, I felt exposed in a way that countless high-risk operations had never made me feel. "Why would you let us believe you'd failed?" my mother asked, hurt evident in her voice. "It wasn't about what you believed," I explained carefully. "It was about operational security. The fewer people who knew, the safer the operations and the people involved." My father, processing this revelation with decades of military experience, was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had been hidden. To reach colonel at your age, in special operations, Jack, with his own military training, was connecting dots fastest. Those unexplained absences, the vague explanations, that time you showed up at Christmas with what looked like shrapnel wounds you claimed were from a car accident. Not a car accident, I confirmed quietly. As reality settled around us, I watched my family recalibrating years of perceptions and judgments. The disappointment they had carried and the disappointment I had endured was transforming into something else entirely, something yet undefined but irrevocably changed. "We have a lot to talk about," my father said finally, his voice carrying the weight of a man discovering he had been wrong about a fundamental truth. "Yes," I agreed. "We do." The family dinner following Jack's ceremony took place at an upscale restaurant near the base, a celebration planned long before the day's revelations. What should have been exclusively focused on Jack's achievement had now become something else entirely, the first honest family gathering of my adult life. We sat at a private table in the corner, security conscious even now. My father ordered wine with uncharacteristic generosity, perhaps recognizing that this conversation required social lubrication. Silence hung heavily as menus were studied with unusual intensity, everyone avoiding the elephant in the room until the waiter departed with our orders. "So," my father began, setting his water glass down with precision, "a colonel." It wasn't a question, but I nodded confirmation. "That's remarkably fast advancement," he continued, the career military officer in him automatically calculating the timeline, "especially for someone in," he lowered his voice, "special operations." It was a unique path, I acknowledged. The program I was recruited into accelerates promotion timelines based on field performance rather than standard time and grade requirements. My mother, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "All those times we thought you were being flaky or irresponsible, disappearing from family events, being unreachable for days, I was deployed." I finished for her, often in locations I can't name, doing things I still can't discuss. Jack leaned forward, professional curiosity mixing with brotherly reassessment. "That scar on your shoulder from 2 Christmases ago. Kabul," I said simply. "Extraction operation went sideways." My father's face tightened. The career naval officer understood immediately what went sideways typically meant. "And we were giving you grief about missing family photos," my mother whispered, horror dawning in her expression. The conversation paused as our salads arrived. When the waiter departed again, my father asked the question that clearly bothered him most. "Why the Air Force you were at the Naval Academy?" I had to smile slightly. Of course, that would be his first substantive question. The program that recruited me operated jointly, but was administratively housed under Air Force Special Operations. The work suited my particular skills, regardless of branch, which are intelligence analysis under high-pressure conditions, pattern recognition in asymmetric environments, asset development and management, some other specialties I can't detail. Jack whistled softly. "That's the heavy stuff, Sam." My mother was struggling to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with this new reality. "But why couldn't you tell us anything? We're your family." "Operational security," I explained gently. "The nature of my work means that knowledge of my real position could potentially endanger operations or expose networks. The cover story was created and maintained by the program, not by my choice." "For 12 years, my father challenged, the hurt beneath his question evident despite his military bearing. "Not one word of truth. That's the job, Dad." I said simply, "You of all people should understand that some positions require complete compartmentalization." He fell silent, military discipline acknowledging what the father in him wanted to deny. The main course arrived, providing another brief reprieve from the intensity of the conversation. As we began eating, Jack broke the tension with a short laugh. "So, all those times I was bragging about my promotions and assignments, you were talking to someone who was briefing Joint Chiefs." I finished with a small smile. "God, I must have sounded like such an idiot." He groaned. "You didn't," I assured him. "Your accomplishments are real and significant. different operational areas, different challenges. My mother set down her fork, her food barely touched. I keep thinking about all the things we said to you over the years, the disappointment we expressed, the judgments. You didn't know, I said. You couldn't have. But we should have trusted you, she insisted, tears gathering. We should have seen that there was more happening than what appeared on the surface. Instead, we just wrote you off. The raw truth of her statement hung in the air. They had written me off, creating a narrative of the disappointing daughter that fit the limited information they had. My father, always less comfortable with emotional displays, redirected slightly. Your upcoming promotion, Admiral Wilson, mentioned a briefing next month. Are you being considered for Brigadier General? I confirmed quietly. It's not finalized yet. His eyebrows rose sharply. At your age, that would be unusual. I acknowledged this. The recommendation is based on the Tavros operation results. That's all I can say about it. My mother wiped her eyes. And we wouldn't have known about this either if today hadn't happened. I hesitated, then admitted the truth. Probably not. The details. Anyway, you might have eventually learned I was military, but specifics about rank and position would have remained classified. The meal continued with questions I could answer intermingled with ones I couldn't. The boundaries of classified information remained even in this new openness, creating an imperfect but vastly improved communication. For the first time, my family was seeing the outline of my real life, even if many details remained in shadow. After dinner, my parents invited me back to their home, a gesture that felt significant after years of emotional distance. In their living room, my mother disappeared briefly before returning with a dusty box. I kept these, she said, setting it between us. Even though I didn't understand why you want them. Inside were mementos from my academy days, my midshipman's cap, academic awards, photographs, items that would have made no sense to preserve for someone who had supposedly failed out. Yet she had kept them anyway. Some part of me never believed the story, she admitted quietly. It didn't fit the daughter I raised, but I couldn't imagine an alternative explanation. My father, after several drinks and hours of processing, had grown unusually reflective. I was hardest on you, he acknowledged. Military directness applied now to personal failing. When we thought you'd washed out, I took it personally, made it about my legacy rather than your path. I understood why, I told him honestly. And maintaining the cover story was part of my duty, even when it was difficult. Duty, he repeated, the concept resonating deeply with his naval corps, at the expense of being known by your own family. Jack, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke again. But things can be different now. Right, I mean. We know the basic truth even if details stay classified. It was the question I'd been considering throughout the evening. Some things can change, I agreed cautiously. You know my actual profession now, my general position, but most of my work will remain classified. There will still be unexplained absences, questions I can't answer. But we'll understand what they mean now, my mother said, as the evening drew to a close. My father did something unprecedented in our relationship. He stood, straightened as if addressing a fellow officer, and extended his hand formally. Colonel Hayes, he said, using my rank for the first time. I believe I owe you an apology, and my respect. I took his hand, years of military bearing preventing the emotion in my throat from showing on my face. Thank you, Captain. It was an imperfect beginning to a new chapter, one where the truth, even partially revealed, created possibility for healing what deception had damaged. As I left my parents' home that night, I carried both the continued weight of necessary secrets and the newfound lightness of being partially known by those who mattered most. 6 months after Jack's seal ceremony, I found myself approaching my parents' home for another family gathering, this time a 4th of July barbecue that had been a Hayes family tradition for decades. The familiar nervousness that had accompanied these visits for years had transformed into something different, a cautious optimism about family relationships rebuilding on more honest ground. As I walked up the driveway carrying a dish I'd actually prepared myself rather than the usual hastily purchased store contribution, I noticed several of my father's old Navy colleagues gathered around the grill. In previous years, I had avoided these military-heavy gatherings whenever possible, finding the deception particularly difficult among those who spoke my professional language. Today was different. My father spotted me and straightened slightly, not quite the attention stance of military protocol, but a new recognition that carried its own significance. Sam's here, he called, using my familiar name but with a new tone. As I approached, he did something unprecedented. He turned to his friends and said, "Gentlemen, my daughter, Colonel Hayes, Air Force Special Operations." The introduction. simple but accurate, represented a seismic shift. The retired officers nodded with the respect of men who understood precisely what the rank and division signified, particularly for someone my age. No details were necessary. The basic facts communicated volumes to those who spoke the language of military service. My mother emerged from the house, her greeting warmer than I could remember in years. As she hugged me, she whispered, "I put together a small display, nothing classified. I promise." Curious, I followed her inside to the study, my father's domain, traditionally filled with his naval memorabilia. In one corner, she had created a discreet but meaningful arrangement, my academy graduation photo, the few unclassified commendations I've been able to share, and a recent formal photograph in uniform following my promotion to Brigadier General. "Is this okay?" she asked, uncertainty in her voice. "I wanted to honor your service too, but I wasn't sure about security concerns." I examined the display carefully. "It's perfect," I assured her. "Nothing here reveals operational details." Her relief was evident. "Good. Your father checks it every day. I think he's still wrapping his mind around everything." Returning to the backyard, I found Jack manning the grill alongside our father. My brother's transformation had been perhaps the most straightforward one military professional recognizing another. With the shared understanding that comes from parallel experiences despite different branches and specializations. "General," he greeted me with a grin and a deliberately informal salute. "Burger or hot dog?" "Both," I replied, falling easily into the sibling banter that had been absent for too long. "I just finished 3 weeks of MREs. I'm making up for lost time." He nodded, understanding immediately what 3 weeks likely signified. Without asking questions he knew I couldn't answer. This new shorthand between us, acknowledging the boundaries of classified work without resentment, had become one of the unexpected gifts of the truth. The afternoon progressed with a lightness I hadn't experienced at family gatherings in over a decade. Though many topics remained off limits, my recent deployment locations, the nature of current operations, the specifics of upcoming assignments, the fundamental truth of who I was and what I did now formed the foundation of our interactions. My father, always more comfortable with actions than words, found ways to express his changed perspective. He introduced me to his colleagues with unmistakable pride. He referenced my operational insight when discussions turned to current military affairs, and most tellingly, he deferred to my expertise in areas where Air Force operations intersected with naval concerns, a professional respect that meant more than any verbal apology. As evening approached and we gathered for the traditional Hayes family photo, I stood beside Jack, both of us now recognized for our service rather than compared by it. My mother arranged us with the precision of a longtime military spouse. "My children," she said to a neighbor who was taking the photograph, "both serving their country, just in different ways." The simple statement acknowledged the parallel value of our different paths, a recognition that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Later, as fireworks illuminated the sky, my father joined me at the edge of the yard, where I'd stepped away briefly to check a secure message. "All good?" he asked, the question encompassing more than the immediate communication. "Yes," I confirmed, returning the phone to my pocket. "Nothing urgent." He nodded, gazing upward at the patriotic display rather than at me, a military man's approach to emotional conversation. "I've been thinking about what it cost you," he said finally, "carrying that cover story all these years, bearing our disappointment when you were actually doing my job." I finished when he trailed off. "That's all it was. Dad, the job I was assigned, with the parameters required." "But the personal cost," he insisted, still watching the fireworks, "missing the recognition you deserved, even from your family." I considered this, formulating my response with the same care I applied to operational assessments. There's something freeing about being evaluated solely on your work, without external expectations or family legacy influencing perceptions, I offered. In some ways, starting with a blank slate, let me define my own path. He absorbed this perspective thoughtfully. "Still, I regret the judgments we made with incomplete information." "That's the nature of intelligence work," I replied with a small smile. "Everyone operates with incomplete information. The difference is whether you recognize its incompleteness." This observation, applying professional principles to personal relationships, seemed to resonate with him. "A fair assessment," he acknowledged, military precision in his nod. As we rejoined the family gathering, I reflected on the strange journey of the past 6 months. The revelation at Jack's ceremony had not instantly repaired years of misunderstanding, but it had created space for something new to grow. The family that had once seen me as their greatest disappointment was now navigating a recalibrated relationship based on partial truth, the maximum disclosure my position allowed. 2 weeks later, I stood at attention during my promotion ceremony, the stars of a brigadier general being affixed to my uniform. Unlike previous promotions celebrated only among cleared colleagues, this one included 3 seats in the family section, occupied by my parents and brother. The technical details of my accomplishments remained classified in the official citation, cloaked in the deliberately vague language of special operations, but the pride in my family's eyes needed no detailed explanation. They understood enough now, not everything, but enough. As the ceremony concluded and I joined my family, my mother embraced me with tears in her eyes. "I always knew you were exceptional," she whispered. "I just didn't know how." My father, ever the naval captain, extended his hand for a formal shake before professional composure gave way to parental pride, and he pulled me into a brief, tight hug. "Well done, General Hayes," he said gruffly. "Well done." The journey from family disappointment to recognized professional had been complicated by necessary secrets and security requirements that would never fully disappear. But standing with my family, accepting congratulations for an achievement they could finally acknowledge, I found peace in being partially known and imperfect but meaningful visibility after years in the shadows. Despite the newfound understanding in my immediate family, explaining my situation to extended relatives proved challenging. Thanksgiving that year, the first since my coming out as a military officer, brought this into sharp focus. My cousin Melanie, who had smugly offered me an administrative job at her law firm the previous year, found herself seated across from me at dinner. The news of my actual career had circulated through the family with predictable embellishment and confusion. "So," she began awkwardly, "I hear you're not actually in insurance." "No," I confirmed simply, taking a measured sip of wine. My father, overhearing, couldn't resist a small revenge for all the years she'd condescended to his daughter. "Samantha commands Special Operations Intelligence Teams," he said, with the casual pride of a parent discussing a child's piano recital rather than classified military operations. "Brigadier General now. Actually," Melanie's expression cycled through disbelief, embarrassment, and something approaching awe. "I had no idea. Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Operational security," I replied, the explanation now well rehearsed. "My work required maintaining cover." "Like a spy?" she asked, voice dropping dramatically, revealing a civilian's movie-influenced conception of intelligence work. I smiled slightly. "Not exactly. More like specialized intelligence analysis and tactical operations support." "She can't tell you the details," my mother interjected protectively. "Most of it's classified." Jack, sensing Melanie's discomfort, steered the conversation towards safer topics, but throughout dinner, I caught her glancing at me with reassessing eyes. The woman who had once pitied me for my apparent mediocrity was now struggling to reconcile that perception with the reality of my position. Later, as we helped clear the table, she approached me in the kitchen. "Me in?" "Sam, I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I was condescending to you for years. I had no idea." "You couldn't have known," I assured her, the response becoming automatic. "That was the point of the cover." "Still," she persisted, "I feel terrible about all those comments. Offering you that admin job." I laughed genuinely for the first time in our adult relationship. "Don't worry about it. In my line of work, being underestimated can be an advantage." This aspect of my revealed identity reconciling with extended family, who had seen me through the lens of apparent failure, would continue to unfold in the coming months. Some relatives embraced the revelation with enthusiasm, asking questions I mostly couldn't answer. Others, like Melanie, navigated the awkwardness of having misjudged so completely. A few seemed almost disappointed to lose the family underachiever, the comparative point that had made their own accomplishments shine brighter. Throughout these interactions, I maintained the delicate balance of acknowledging my career without revealing operational details, becoming adept at redirecting conversations to the limited aspects of my work I could discuss openly. The true test of our family's new understanding came 3 months after my promotion, when an international crisis erupted that required my immediate deployment, unlike previous years. This time I was able to tell my family that I was being deployed for classified operations, not the details, but the basic fact. "How long will you be gone?" my mother asked as I prepared to leave after a hurried goodbye visit. "I can't say exactly," I answered honestly. "At least a month, possibly longer." My father, standing in the doorway with military stiffness that couldn't quite mask his concern, nodded understanding. "Communications blackout." "Most likely," I confirmed. "I'll reach out when I can, but it might be a while." Instead of the disappointment or judgment that would have accompanied such an announcement in previous years, my parents showed a new kind of support, the knowing acceptance of a military family that understands what service demands. "We'll be here when you get back," my father said simply, "and we'll be proud, knowing what you're doing, even if we don't know the specifics." My mother added, "The deployment stretched to nearly 3 months, involving a complex counterterrorism operation across multiple countries. When I finally returned, exhausted but successful, I found my parents had maintained my apartment, collected my mail, and prepared for my homecoming with the quiet efficiency of people who understood what a returning officer needs: privacy, rest, and minimal demands." My father had placed a small package on my kitchen counter, a vintage compass in a wooden box with a simple note: "To help find your way home." It was not just a gift, but an acknowledgement of the paths I'd navigated alone for so long. In the days that followed, neither of my parents pressed for details about where I'd been or what I'd done. Instead, they simply incorporated my presence back into family life with a new awareness of the weight I might be carrying from operations I couldn't discuss. One evening, as I sat with my father on his back porch, the silence between us comfortable rather than strained, he asked the question that I realized had been forming in his mind for months. "Do you regret it, choosing this path over the Navy, over a career your family could have witnessed and celebrated?" I considered carefully before answering. "No," I said finally. "The work itself has been exactly right for me, challenging in ways that align with how my mind works. And while the cover story created distance, it also gave me freedom to define myself by my actual abilities rather than family expectations." He nodded slowly, accepting this answer with the thoughtfulness that had characterized our new relationship. "Your grandfather, my father, believed naval service was the highest calling," he said after a moment. "I inherited that belief without questioning it. I wanted the same for my children, particularly you, with your analytical mind. I saw your acceptance to the academy as confirmation that my path was the right one for you, too." "It was the right first step," I offered. "Just not the final destination." "The Air Force," he said, with the faintest twist of his mouth that wasn't quite dismay anymore. "Of all branches." I smiled at the old inter-service rivalry showing through. "The mission chose the branch, Dad, not the other way around." "I suppose excellence transcends the uniform," he conceded, in what might have been the most significant shift in his military worldview in 40 years. The following spring brought Jack and Allison's wedding, an event I was determined not to miss this time. I coordinated with my command months in advance, ensuring no deployments would interfere, and even arranged for another officer to cover my responsibilities for the full weekend. The morning of the wedding, I stood with my mother in the preparation area of the church, watching as she fussed over final details with the precision of a military operation. "Mom," I said, catching her hand as she adjusted a flower arrangement for the third time. "Everything looks perfect." She paused, seeming to really see me for the first time that day. "You look beautiful. Sam, that dress uniform. I never thought I'd see you in one." I glanced down at my formal Air Force uniform, adorned with the ribbons and insignia I was permitted to wear publicly. "Different from what you imagined. Better," she said firmly, "because it's real. I spent so many years worrying about you, imagining you were drifting through life without purpose. If I'd known, you would have worried differently." I finished for her with a smile. "About missions and deployments instead of career advancement." "Yes," she agreed, "but I would have been proud every day, instead of just concerned." As the ceremony began and Jack stood tall at the altar, I found myself reflecting on the parallel journeys we'd taken: different branches, different specializations, but ultimately the same core commitment to service. When he spotted me in the front row, the look we exchanged held the newfound respect of peers as well as siblings. The reception that followed was filled with naval and military personnel, many of whom now recognized me by rank and reputation rather than just as Jack's sister. Several approached to express quiet appreciation for operations they knew I'd been involved with, maintaining the careful language of those who understand classification boundaries. Admiral Wilson, who had inadvertently triggered the revelation of my identity at Jack's seal ceremony, approached me during the reception. "General Hayes," he greeted me formally before breaking into a genuine smile. "I hope there are no hard feelings about what happened at the ceremony last year." "None whatsoever, Admiral," I assured him. "In retrospect, it was time for my family to know." He nodded, glancing toward where my parents were greeting guests. "Your father seems to have adjusted to having an Air Force star in a Navy family." "It's been an evolution," I acknowledged, "but we've found new common ground." "The service itself," he suggested. "Exactly. The commitment transcends the branch. As the evening progressed, I found myself dancing with my father, a rare moment of traditional father daughter interaction that had been largely absent from our relationship. Your brother looks happy, he observed as we moved across the floor with the disciplined steps of people accustomed to formal military functions. He does, I agreed. Allison's good for him. And you, he asked carefully, is there someone in your life, someone who understands your work? The question touched on the personal sacrifices my career had required, not just family relationships, but romantic ones as well. The operational tempo, security requirements, and extended deployments had made lasting connections difficult. Not currently, I answered honestly. The kind of work I do makes conventional relationships challenging. He nodded, understanding. Your mother worries about you being alone. I'm not alone, I assured him. I have a team I trust with my life. Colleagues who understand exactly what I do and why. And now, I have my family again, even if you don't know all the details. His hand tightened briefly on mine, a silent acknowledgement of both what had been lost and what had been regained. We're proud of you, Samantha, he said, the use of my full name carrying the weight of formal declaration. I want you to know that, whatever happens, whatever parts of your service remain classified, we're proud of the officer you've become. The simple statement, delivered with military directness, healed something I hadn't realized was still raw. The need for parental approval might be childish for a brigadier general with combat decorations, but it resonated nonetheless. Thank you, I said simply. That means more than you know. 1 year after the revelation at Jack's ceremony, I found myself facing an unexpected professional crossroads. I was offered command of a newly formed joint task force focused on emerging threats, a position that would advance my career, but would also require a permanent relocation to Washington, D.C., further from my now reconciled family. As I weighed the opportunity, I made an unprecedented decision. I consulted my father for advice. We sat in his study, surrounded by the naval memorabilia of his career, now interspersed with a few permissible acknowledgments of mine that my mother had curated. The position is significant, I explained, outlining the non-classified aspects of the role. It would mean developing new operational protocols for threats we're only beginning to understand. And it puts you on track for further advancement, he observed. Potentially full general. If successful, yes. But it also means moving across the country. Less flexibility for family events. He considered this with the strategic thinking that had characterized his naval career. You're concerned about rebuilding these family connections only to strain them again with distance. Partly, I acknowledged. It took 12 years to get back to this point with you. With Mom, with Jack. I don't want to jeopardize that. The difference, he pointed out, is that now we understand the distance would be geographical, not emotional. I nodded, recognizing the truth in his distinction. What would you advise one of your officers facing a similar choice? He asked. It was a perfect question, shifting the frame from daughter seeking approval to commander making strategic decisions. I'd tell them to evaluate the mission impact against the personal cost, I said thoughtfully, to consider where they could contribute most effectively. And if you apply that analysis to yourself, I sighed. The task force needs someone with my specific background. The threat matrix is evolving in directions that align with my expertise. Objectively, I'm the right officer for the position. Then you've answered your own question, he said simply. The mission comes first. That's the commitment we both made when we took our oaths. And the family aspect? He smiled slightly. We survived 12 years of believing you were an insurance administrator. I think we can handle having a daughter who commands a joint task force in D.C. His calm acceptance of what the position would mean, the missed holidays, the brief visits, the continued secrecy around my work reflected how completely our relationship had transformed. The father who had once judged me for apparently abandoning military service now supported my commitment to it, even at personal cost. When I eventually accepted the position, my family organized a private dinner to celebrate no mention of the specific role, no questions about operational details, just recognition of the achievement and the opportunity it represented. As we raised glasses and toast, my father's eyes met mine with the understanding that had finally grown between us. To service, he said simply. To family, I countered. Jack, ever the peacemaker, raised his glass higher. To both, he suggested, in all their complicated glory. We drank to that shared truth, the balance we were all still learning to maintain between duty to country and connection to each other. As I packed for my move to Washington, sorting through the artifacts of my dual life, I found a photograph I'd kept hidden for years myself in uniform after my first major commendation. Smiling with the unguarded pride of achievement, I had never displayed it, never shared it, keeping it instead in a secure lockbox along with other remnants of my true professional identity. Now, I placed it carefully in a frame and added it to the items I would take to my new office, a small but significant acknowledgement that my achievements no longer required complete concealment. The day before my departure, my parents hosted another family gathering, this one explicitly to say goodbye. Unlike previous separations marked by my family's disappointment and my silent duty, this one carried the weight of mutual understanding. My mother, always practical in emotional moments, pressed a carefully wrapped package into my hands. For your new home, she explained. Inside was a handcrafted quilt in Air Force blues and silvers rather than the naval colors that dominated their home, a material acknowledgement of my chosen path. It's beautiful, I said, genuinely touched by the months of work the gift represented. I should have made it years ago, she replied. Better late than never. My father's parting gift was more symbolic, a shadow box containing his Navy insignia alongside a newly acquired Air Force emblem. Different branches, he said, echoing our evolving understanding. Same mission. As I prepared to leave, Jack pulled me aside for a final private word. I was thinking about all those family gatherings, he said thoughtfully. All those times I talked about my training, my assignments, never realizing what you were really doing. You couldn't have known, I reminded him. That's just it, he continued. None of us knew. But you were there anyway. You showed up for family events between classified deployments, listened to us talk about our lives when you couldn't share yours, maintained relationships that must have felt completely one-sided. I hadn't considered it from that perspective before, the strength required not just to keep secrets, but to maintain connections despite them. It was still family, I said simply. He nodded. And it still is. Different now, but still family. As I drove away from my parents' home toward my new assignment, I reflected on the strange journey of the past year, from family disappointment to recognized professional, from isolation to imperfect but meaningful connection. The dual identity I had maintained for so long had collapsed into a more integrated self, not fully transparent due to continued classification requirements, but no longer fundamentally divided between personal and professional worlds. I would always carry secrets my family couldn't share. There would always be aspects of my work I couldn't bring home, missions I couldn't explain, absences I couldn't fully account for. But the core truth of who I was and what I did was now acknowledged, creating space for a relationship based on reality rather than necessary fiction. For anyone who has been misjudged or underestimated, there's a powerful lesson in this experience. Sometimes the truth emerges in unexpected ways, and sometimes the perceptions others hold aren't reflections of reality, but simply products of limited information. The worth you create through your work and choices remains valid even when unrecognized. And authenticity, even when necessarily incomplete, creates possibilities for connection that deception cannot. In the end, the greatest revelation wasn't that I was a colonel when my family thought I was a dropout. It was that, despite years of misunderstanding and judgment, the foundation of family remained strong enough to rebuild once truth finally found its way to the surface. As I crossed the country toward my new command, I carried with me not just the responsibility of the position, but also the newfound certainty that no matter where my duty led me, I now had a family who understood enough to be proud, even of the parts they could never fully know.